Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read along podcast. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
That is your host, Greg, who somehow still knows very little about the Wheel of Time, even though he usually pretends otherwise.
And that is Tylor, our resident expert, who makes sure you know how much he knows about the Wheel of Time.
It's a lot. Join us each week as we continue our journey through Robert Jordan's great fantasy epic, exploring the books, the television show, ill-advised discussions of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and so much more. Although actually not, it's just that.
Yes, all that and actually nothing else as we travel on, and I know what this means now, through the glass columns.
Yeah, he really doesn't know all that much.
No, you don't know that much. Hello, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast, now with 75% less summary, at least if you're counting off of last week. Of course, am Greg, the one who does no real prep or hard work for this at all, and I am joined by Tylor, who does all those summaries. Tylor, it's a comparatively very, very easy week this week.
Yeah, compared to last week, everything feels very easy. I always have to say, at the beginning of every single one of these books, I always feel just at home when I start reading those opening kind of, words, the things that we see repeated in every book. And then immediately, every single book I am hit by, oh, this feels a little different. Until this one, when the intro was basically identical to the intro of book 2. A wind blows, there's a sword fight, Rand is learning how to be a better sword fighter. I was curious what you thought of your sixth pass through this. Are you starting to feel like there is a rhythm to the beginning of these books? Are you still very much someone who forgets what the last book, how it started by the time you get here? Kind of what's your feeling as we are now kind of a repetitive process for us now of getting to the beginning of a book and reading about where the wind blows?
First, how dare you assert that I'm forgetful? If there's anything these last 750 episodes of Through the Glass Columns have proven, it's that I have the memory of a elephant. Who has memories? Elephants have memories. Yeah. Sure. I actually also made the connection to book 2 because I remembered that one opened with Lan and Rand practicing sword fighting, and so that was very cool. I will say my main reaction is I felt there's a great episode of Community where the gang puts on a Christmas pageant, and when it starts, the dean goes, "Oh, Britta's in this?" And I had that reaction. I'm like, "Oh, Rand's in this one," because it had been a nice long prologue, kind of checking in on so many different people, and it's like, oh, but we're just going to be back to the kind of courtly intrigue. And, I didn't seriously think Rand wouldn't be in this, although that has happened in the past.
It's happened once, yeah.
So, but it was kind of, Maz Kanata in Force Awakens looks at Han Solo, says, "You're just right back in it," and that really just is how this intro felt, right? We're just right back in it, kind of continuing on. I think I would say, the nostalgia of those kind of opening lines and words is hitting me more and more. It's like, it very much feels to me like the old Disney cartoons that would open with like a book and you'd see the cover and the title page. It's kind of like that kind of nice warm hug as we get into it and kind of open up into that moment. And then it's a little funny this time just because we read so much last week.
Yeah. I think then it makes sense just to dive into what feels like a bunch of recap, but also a bunch of really interesting new details and plot in Chapter 1, Lion on the Hill. The wheel turns, a wind rises in Cairhien, and there is a civil war all over that's just causing refugees to flood into Caemlyn. Rand spars with 5 opponents, the best he can find now that Lan is gone, and he charges them and then unexpectedly changes directions, quickly defeating 2 of them and then 2 more, but the last anticipates one of his moves and hits him on the head. Rand has apparently offered a bounty to any of these individuals who can defeat him in practice, and an even larger one if they can defeat him one-on-one. The lords clap, but Rand thinks thinks that all of them followed Ravin, and so they're not exactly the people who he would ideally like to have as his allies. He thinks about an old parable and then worries that it is Lews Therin's memory rather than his own. Rand thinks that the maidens still disapprove of his sword, but are changing their camouflage and adapting in other ways as they get more used to the wetlands. He sends away the swordsman, and Aramilla immediately starts flattering and flirting with him, while Elenia points out her knowledge of the history and also tries to flirt, clearly making her case for being the queen of Caemlyn. Jared, Corinda, and Nyan all compliment his sword play as well. Rand undercuts their excuses for his loss, surprising them, and they shift to instead praising his wisdom. The lords discuss how to know a friend from an enemy, and Elenia and Nyan both seem to use the opportunity to cast aspersions on all of the lords who are not currently in the city. A noble diffuses the tension by bringing up swordplay when Bashere arrives, asking why Rand practices the sword at all. Bashere eventually leaps at Rand with a dagger, and Rand ties him up in flows of air and eventually has to call off his guards. Rand tells Bashere that he could kill him if he wants to, but Davram says that is not a good thing and his wife wouldn't like it, and then Rand asks why Bashere would attack him like that, and he says that Rand isn't at risk of any swordsman openly attacking him, and it is only some sort of supernatural assassin that could get past all of his other defenses, and so Bashere says that he is focusing on the wrong things. The Andorrans all seem ready to turn on Bashere if Rand does, but then Rand thinks to himself the only way to live is to die, and he thinks that this is something that he has been told in the past in such a way that he believes it, and at this point he begins to soften towards Bashere. Bashere notes that he seemed lost in thought for a moment there, and he is worried that he is concussed, when Rand then insists that he is fine, but thinks that Lews Therin is growing in his mind as he masters channeling more and more, and that Lews Therin is clearly mad. Bashere says that he needs an Aes Sedai advisor, and that Morghase's advisor ran, literally screaming from the city, but there are rumors of another Aes Sedai in the city, and Bashere seems to think that he needs more support. Rand asks if he can trust any Aes Sedai at this point, and Bashere insists that he can. Rand lays out the need for a battle in either Amadicia or Ilion, and says that is his next focus, but at this point Aramilla faints because he mentions Samael in terms of his discussion of Ilion. Rand wonders if any of the nobles knew about Ravin and supported him anyways, and Bashere is confident that his and Mat's plan for Ilion is going to go off without a hitch, but Bashere does wonder where Mat learned to plan a battle, and he mentions Jagad as a potential teacher for him, but Rand keeps Mat's secret. Bashere says that Rand should bring Egwene Sedai from Cairhien, and Rand kind of laughs this off, thinking that he doesn't know about Egwene's secret. At this point, Samara brings Rand a heavy shirt and is mothering him despite the unseasonable heat. Bashere pushes Rand about having an Aes Sedai advisor, and Rand reveals the split in the tower and that he thinks he will receive the support of the rebels, but Bashere warns him that the rebels may not have the full force of the tower, while also thinking about the Aes Sedai and how that is causing Lews Therin to talk more and more in his head. Rand says that he will use the Aes Sedai but never trust them, and Bashere then warns him against opposing the Aes Sedai directly when a messenger arrives, and Mazrim Taim is apparently here. So this was a lot of politicking, it was a lot of catch-up, but I found it oddly engaging in spite of that. What was your take on this chapter overall? And I think most interestingly, for me at least, is Bashere as kind of the new dynamic character against Rand and the nobles, who are kind of doing the things we expect at this point.
Yeah, and one of my first questions for you is just to remind us and fill us in on Bashere and kind of how, because it does feel like a promotion for that character, a name I'm familiar with, but I don't know that I always remember the ins and outs of them. But to answer your question before just posing my own, I will say, I wasn't really upset to see Rand despite my opening comments, but then as it starts to be these kind of, jockeying court attendees, I'm like, oh, this is what I don't want. Like, I want this to get burned down. And to be clear, it's not me being mad at Robert Jordan. I think that's what he wants us to feel, that all these kind of sniveling, sycophantic kind of followers are just like, why this world needs a new system, right? Again, who can imagine such a world? It doesn't have a parallel to our current experiences whatsoever. But I feel like in those moments, it's like I just kind of automatically hate all of these people around him. as I think we're
Yeah.
supposed to. And I want Rand to just kind of firmly take the reins in this situation.
So let me begin by answering your question. Who is Davram Bashere? Number one, he is Fail's father. That was, I believe, the first time we noted him. Second, he is the Lord General of Saldia, so he seems to be kind of the head military commander of one of the borderlands. Number three, he is the cousin of the Queen Tenobia, so he is not himself a king or in line for the throne, but is kind of in the royal family. And finally, he first arrived in Caemlyn in the epilogue of the previous book, and he is now supporting Rand despite the fact that he was originally sent here to track down Mazrim Taim, who arrives at the end of this chapter. Are there any other details or questions you have, or is that kind of the level of overview that is helpful for you?
That's a good set of reminders. I would just add to that in case people make the foolish mistake that I would never mistake. Don't forget that Saldia and Saldara are very different places located in the far north and the far south, correct?
That is accurate, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe Salidar, not Saldara, but yes.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, in general, I think that what we've got is now this new interesting character who I find to be a breath of fresh air in the midst of exactly what you are describing, right? The early part of this chapter gives us like 6 different nobles, all with different names and all with exactly the same goal. And it doesn't do much for me. And then Bashere shows up and literally cuts right through it with a dagger. I don't know if you have much to say about the sniveling nobles as you describe them, or if you want to just jump right into the most interesting character in the room, but there's something really curious about Bashere just showing up and demanding that Rand explain himself in a way that no one really has done since he became the Dragon Reborn.
Well, and Rand shares a lot of that attitude of like kind of game recognized game, right? Like he appreciates the boldness and that he's got kind of a better quality interlocutor, at least temporarily, but seemingly for at least a book, I would imagine. I think the only thing I really liked your selection of the word stagnation, because so much of the weather is also that, right? Yeah. Like the way it's described is that kind of oppressive summer heat, which I'm desperate for right now, if I'm honest, but is, just tiresome. And it feels like, our lives stagnate in that weather. And so if there's this unseasonable heat wave going on, everybody's kind of overwhelmed with it, but you kind of get the oppressive sense that like, these people have been through a lot and are just kind of stuck following Rand and don't have a lot, that they get to shape or determine.
Yeah, this was an interesting thing that I had in this chapter is I was really kind of debating with myself, is it as Rand thinks that the people in Caemlyn are just worse at the game of houses, and so as a result, he is seeing all of this kind of like sloppy, obvious planning? Or is it that what he's dealing with is a country that has already been so kind of screwed up by the Queen leaving abruptly and a Forsaken running it and all of that, that as you say, they're just almost like too exhausted to keep up with the politics, and so they're kind of doing a sloppy job. I think the more you kind of enable the people sitting around in a semicircle in these scenes with Rand to be kind of full, fleshed out people, the more it works as a chapter. That being said, there's way too many of them.
Well, and I sometimes I think I accidentally confuse Caemlyn with Baerlon, because those were the 2 cities that we went to in Eye of the World, I believe. Look, I mean, come on.
Nailed it.
I pulled Baerlon out of nowhere. Because Baerlon was described almost like a kind of frontiers city, or a frontier town, right, where it was kind of log cabin-ish construction and so on. And so I do recognize that Caemlyn is like the seat of a major kingdom and more settled and not that rustic, but it does feel like as compared to Cairhien and compared to Tar Valon, this is kind of a little less of a politicking city. Yeah. I don't know what the right comp is. The Baltimore to Washington D.C. or something. I'm not sure. Philly? Maybe we're in Philly. That's loaded right now, but it seems right.
If we're taking the historical analog, I believe that would be Tar Valon is Rome and Cairhien is France, and then Camelin would be the English court, which at least traditionally was thought of as kind of less sophisticated than those other much more kind of political areas. So I think that's perfectly fitting the way that we've kind of categorized each of these countries as being like vaguely resembling something European. I think you're kind of hitting that nail on the head. Boy, does Bashir have a way of making a point, and it involves trying to stab Rand. But interestingly, I think what he was trying to get at with all of that is just like, you need someone to be giving you advice, and it should be someone who comes with some political cachet, right? Like, he seems to think having an Aes Sedai advisor might be worth it, even if Rand doesn't listen to the Aes Sedai. And Bashir, it's worth noting in this section, he is kind of well regarded by everyone who sees him. The Aiel seem to accept him very quickly. The nobles seem to kind of think of him as a genius. And so when Bashir is giving this kind of advice, I actually kind of begin to wonder, is Rand going to get in trouble from lack of Aes Sedai in his corner?
I mean, it felt like a very successful audition to be his like chief advisor, right? Like the one who was going to literally cut through all the BS and just be there. I was thinking, I think it's Pink Panther, those old movies that he has an assistant who is charged with always trying to kill him. And then this is a thing that happens in a lot of different video games and stories, but it feels like that's the audition. Like, let me keep testing you to see if we can get there.
Yeah.
I like the advice that he should have an Aes Sedai in his corner, but, I felt like the suggestion it should be Egwene, which Rand pretty much rejects pretty quickly, felt like just a forcible way to make sure those characters catch back up to this plot line. But I guess since he rejected it, it's not that.
Yeah, no, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I do, as we're talking about Aes Sedai in Rand's life, last week we were talking about the number of Aes Sedai going to different cities and kind of Rand's potential worry if any of those numbers got too close to 13. It's worth noting at this point there are 2 Aes Sedai potentially rumored to still be in Camelin. One was the Red Aja sister who was brought to be Morghase's advisor after Elida, who apparently literally ran screaming, but we don't know to where. And the second is just a broad rumor of a sister somewhere in the city, but Rand doesn't have any more details than that. Just as we're going forward and we're thinking like, we know that Saladar sent 9 Aes Sedai to Camelin. If there are 2 others there, that puts us at 11. That is a dangerously high number for Rand. The other note that I had here is Bashir mentions that he and Matt Cawthon have been putting together battle plans, specifically for how they are going to send soldiers south to Ilion. And when he does this, he mentions kind of asking Rand, how did Matt get so much knowledge about battle? Who did he study with? How did he get it? He kind of ends up giving Rand an out, something along the lines of like, is there a library where he studied, or did he learn this on his own? But his initial assumption is that he must have learned it from someone, and I want to kind of point out a small detail that's been brought up a couple places but not much throughout this series. I believe the first time we got this was in the second book. Pedro Nial refers to himself as what is known as a great captain, and he says that there are 5 great captains in the world. One of them, it's worth noting, is Davram Bashere, the person who is directly in front of us here. One of them we have already seen and is now in Saladar is Gareth Brine. We get a mention of now the 4th that we have heard of. Agelmar Jagad is apparently another Borderlander who is regarded as one of the great captains. And it is worth noting that from Bashir's perspective, Matt is so good at battle planning that the assumption is he must have learned from one of those 5 men. So I think that both kind of gives us a sense of where Matt is in terms of like the hierarchy of battle commanders. He is right up there with the best of them. But I think it's worth reminding ourselves that when we're thinking of kind of the great generals of the era, 4 of them are now, we know at least vaguely where they are, and a couple of them are kind of aligned with major characters.
Yeah, that's very helpful and interesting. I think I'd primarily read that as like Matt's better than all of them, right? Like
Yeah.
almost he's got the glory of a former age that probably regularly experienced this type of warfare, whereas I would assume based on the timeline that we know of, maybe these men got their starts in the Trolloc Wars, right? But
Uh,
or the Aiel
yeah.
Wars, sorry.
Yeah, Aiel Wars. There we go.
Yeah, but it kind of like, but now they are the old wise commanders who were foot soldiers there, so they haven't seen like continuous action. One would imagine, although maybe some Borderlanders would have.
Yeah, so we are now, it's worth noting, Rand's age is the time since the Aiel War. So the great commanders were probably people who were, like, in charge of maybe divisions during the Aiel War, and now are the ones running, like, the full battlefield as a result of the commendations they earned in that war. I think that's exactly the right timeline to kind of be keeping in mind. And it's worth noting, in the last chapter, we saw Pedron Niala from Morghase's perspective, and her first thought was like, oh my god, this is a decrepit old man. So, like, when we're talking about the great commanders, it is kind of the last generation, and Matt seems to be at least the first of the next generation to show that kind of great battlefield talent. I think we'd be remiss, even though I know we'll be talking about it more in the next chapter. I need to mention Lews Therin and his voice in Rand's head here. Both because there are a couple of very interesting moments where Rand isn't sure which one of them is thinking, and that is kind of scary from my perspective. The other reason that I want to mention this is because there is a specific phrase that Rand thinks that either he or Lews Therin could have thought, but then says that he heard it from someone in such a way that he believes it. So the phrase that Rand kind of seems to be pondering over repeatedly is the only way to live is to die. And this is a concept that fascinates Lews Therin because Lews Therin wants to die, but fascinates Rand because someone told it to him and he believes them. This makes me start questioning, like, is this prophecy? Is this a Min vision? We know that Rand got the answers to 3 questions through the stone doorway in Tyr. Is this potentially an answer that he got from the fox people or the snake people? There's a lot of possibilities here, but to live you must die is very interesting from Rand, who is obviously prophesied to die.
And I was, how do I say this? That language is reminiscent of a current ad campaign going on for season 3 of the television show, and it's not exactly the same and doesn't seem to be the exact same kind of characters in the mix. I think we know what the season 3 ad campaign is hinting at if we're book readers, right?
Yeah.
But it struck me that I would not say those themes have been major on the way through these books so far, and now they're kind of coming more and more to the foreground to try to keep that a little vague. So then my mind goes to how is he going to fulfill that prophecy but still live, right? And Harry Potter comes to mind, right? That Harry Potter had to be killed but was resurrected. And, resurrection is such a major theme in, mythological heroism. I would assume we would find some way to get Rand to essentially experience that in some way. But that's, I'm sure, at least 6 or 7 books from now, if that's the case.
Yeah, I cannot say even a little bit of a thing about that. I think the last note that I have here is for about a book and a half, Rand has been very frustrated with the amount of mothering that the Aiel have been giving him, specifically the Maidens of the Spear, and it has never worked for me thus far because it is just Rand being like, "Oh man, these maidens, they're treating me like a child," but we never really see it. On the other hand, in this chapter, when the Maidens of the Spear are like, here is a warm shirt, make sure you don't catch a cold. By the way, it's 85 degrees outside. That is hilarious, and Robert Jordan needs to do more of it, right? I think there are a lot of things that he's been talking about that we see in this chapter, and it's just so much better to see it than have it told to us.
Yes, I agree with that, and I agree, I was debating whether or not to save this, but I will say one of the things I haven't mentioned from this chapter is I do, and this was hinted at in your last comment as well, like, it does feel like Rand is about the same level of unstable that he was at the end of the last book. So that has not progressed significantly, for one.
Yeah.
But the mix of like how he's relating to these people, including the Aiel and the Lews Therin voice in his head, or the voice that may be Lews Therin that he's debating, it just all feels like, okay, we're getting reminders that this is not a totally all right individual. And I do think the second Dune movie did a great job of showing what somebody looks like when they talk to the voice, in this case in their stomach, in Dune, but in their head. And I kind of imagine that, like, if the camera were not in his head, I think he'd look more and more like a crazy person.
Yeah, I think this was the first chapter here where we really see someone just go like, why did you stop talking for 30 seconds? And the fact that Rand isn't noticing that time passing, I think, as you're saying, is really telling for how other people are going to be perceiving him. There's a bunch of stuff here that overlaps with the next chapter, so I think we probably just go straight to the summary. Let's do it. Chapter 2, A New Arrival. More mention of Taim seems to shake the nobles, and Rand says that he is here for the amnesty, but Bashere worries that he wants to be the Dragon Reborn in spite of Rand clearly fulfilling prophecy. Rand is confident that with his Angreal, he would be able to shut down Taim if necessary. Rand apparently doesn't know that Asmodean is dead, as he is thinking about the threats he lists him among them, and Bashere agrees to respect the amnesty, but apparently not in Saldia, and says that Taim will be killed if he ever steps foot there. Rand angrily dismisses the remaining nobles after they kind of put up a show of wanting to stay, and at this point Taim enters, tightly guarded, and Rand studies him, thinking that he has avoided the madness for over a decade, and as he does so, Lews Therin begins ranting about Samael and Demandred before demanding that Taim be killed. Taim mocks Bashere with apparent compulsion that he put on 4 Saldean lords, and then Taim says that he came to see Rand, who corrects him when Taim says that he saw him battling the Dark One in the sky, and says in fact he was actually battling Ishamael in the sky. At this point, Rand lists all of the crimes of the Forsaken and says that he knows hundreds more, saying that he will pardon Taim if he is willing to help him hunt down the Forsaken. Taim suggests that there should be more of a partnership rather than an oath of fealty, but eventually Rand says that no, that is not possible, and is barely able to shut down Lews Therin, demanding that Rand kill him in his head. Eventually Taim agrees and kneels, saying that this was the obvious choice to follow Rand because at least he can get some of the glory, if not all of it. Taim says he tried to fulfill the prophecies of the dragon to see whether or not he was the dragon, and when Rand tells him to keep his focus on Tarmon Gai'dan, Taim seems to accept this, but also seems interested in the glory that will come during Tarmon Gai'dan. Rand asks if Taim can test others for the ability to channel or teach it, and he says that he can do both, and claims that he is still sane despite all of this time, but he also knows others who have gone insane in less than 2 years. Rand wonders if Taim's confidence is actually a sign that he has the early stages of madness, and then Taim gives Rand a gift, which is a seal of the Dark One's prison. Lews Therin immediately begins ranting that it must be broken and the seals must be destroyed, and Rand abruptly realizes that he is repeating that over and over again out loud. Bashere gently suggests that Rand not break the seal, and then Rand asks Taim if he knows of another one, and Taim does not. But he references a strange series of stories and occurrences, and says that the Dark One's prison is most definitely weakening. He claims that he found the seal to the Dark One's prison at a farm, and the farmers had been guarding it for thousands of years. Rand instructs Bashere to prepare to protect the seal, and then Rand asks Bashere why he seems unbothered by Rand's seeming madness, and Bashere tells him the story of a mad general that he served under, who was clearly insane, but also was the best general at the time, and so everyone was happy to follow him. Bashere then says that he follows Rand because of who Rand is. Rand says that he is taking Taim to the farm, and Bashere declines to go, but insists that Rand must inspect his troops later that afternoon, which Rand thinks is important to their plan that they concocted with Mat. At this point, Rand thinks that he doesn't like Taim, and Lews Therin clearly wants to kill him, but Rand tells Taim that he is taking him where he can best serve Rand, clearly not the thing that Taim wanted to hear. So we have a new character on the scene, and he seems full of himself, which is fun because so is Lews Therin, and they're not getting along, even though one of them is imaginary. What are your thoughts on Taim and our new arrival in this chapter?
Non-racist Phantom Menace impression. Now there are two of them, right? That this was the non-racist part is I'm not doing the accent.
I got you.
Just for listeners. I did think this was a pretty excellent entry of a new character for the reasons you just elucidated. And what struck me was that he comes on the scene and he's super cocky, and then Rand's like, Neil, bow to me, and he's like, oh, cool, yep, I'll do that, and did. And so that is a really interesting dynamic, and it's hard to tell if that is it certainly doesn't feel like actual humility, but if it's a means of getting closer for his own reasons, or if it is potentially like a meaningful alliance. That's kind of, to me, the big question here, and certainly one I'm not ready to fully answer, just seeing these initial interactions.
Yeah, I think I remember all the way back when I first read this, maybe like the second read through, I just remember being like, I think Taim is so slimy in these early scenes that I have like very little doubt that he is either in this purely for self-gain or is like planning to betray Rand in some way down the line. Like, I just do not walk away from even this first chapter going, Taim, what a great guy. He's going to save the day at the end of this. And I'm not sure if it's intentional by Robert Jordan to kind of put it on that thick, or if he's kind of red herring it or what have you. But right now, 10 pages into Mazrim Taim, I'm not liking him as a character. Notably to me, early in the chapter, though, Rand is very clearly kind of thinking about who is teaching him to channel and how did he learn and what else can he get from someone who is experienced. And it's worth noting that his previous teacher, Rand apparently never found a body. He is actively worried at the beginning of this chapter that Asmodean will come back and cause problems for him. So I think that is a really interesting dynamic that is hanging over this scene, is that Rand has recently lost his longtime mentor and believes that his short-term mentor has probably turned on him and is back to his evil ways, and that makes the dilemma of Taim as whatever he is going to be for Rand, I think a really interesting. It's an interesting character moment to see how Rand reacts to a potential new teacher after so much upheaval in his recent teachers.
Yes, I like that, and then we get these hints that Taim worked with someone else and oversaw at least some form of teaching. He presents as much more knowledgeable and worldly than Rand in a lot of ways in these scenes. Whether that's a front or actuality, I think, again, is a question. And I liked the moment, part of that cockiness where he's like, it's a flip of a coin. I could have taken Tyr and then all the prophecies would be about me, but you got there first. And that kind of attitude sounded very right to me, which is, maybe it is just who checks the boxes. Again, I really don't in my daily life mention Harry Potter that much, but when we come on the show, we do. And it feels to me like that kind of plot point in Harry Potter that Neville could have just as easily been the chosen one, but Voldemort chose Harry by going to kill Harry instead. And so to me, it feels kind of like that moment here where it's like, it really is just about checking off the boxes in these prophecies. You got the dragons on you, so I guess that's you, or what have you.
Yeah, I think Rand and Taim almost have different philosophies about prophecy, right? Rand is like, these are the things that if someone does them, it proves they are the dragon reborn. And Taim's philosophy seems to be, if anyone can do them, they are by definition the dragon reborn, right? And so he's setting out to fulfill them instead of using them as like the guardrails. This actually makes me think of way back in the second book when Verin made the 5 will ride forth prophecy come true by stopping the party once there were 5 of them in it and saying, no, Loyal, you can't go with them. It seems like Taim is kind of taking that same approach of like, if the prophecy says there are 5, I'm just going to kill people until there's only 5 left. That's darker than Taim says in anything here. But I think that difference you're highlighting is really important. And it's maybe why Rand is the savior we need instead of the savior we want, right? Like, you kind of don't want someone chasing the prophecy. It's the person who it happens to accidentally who would actually be better for the job.
Sounds right. And I mean, I think you said it and I implied it, but this just sizzles as a new kind of chemistry we haven't seen in these books, and it's going to be really exciting. Even though I immediately started going like, when can we get Logain here too? Like, let's get another one and really mix it up.
So I think then the interesting thing then is you're right. We have Rand and we have Mazrim Taim in a room and sparks are flying. And then really interestingly, we have Lews Therin actively responding to Taim, but also actively responding at multiple points in this chapter to the Seals of the Dark One's prison and to mentions of Aes Sedai. And so this idea that Lews Therin is not just a voice in Rand's head that's getting more prominent, but it's actively responding to different types of stimuli, and it seems to not like Taim, and that kind of ability to form opinions of other individuals is troubling for a voice in Rand's head.
Yes, right. And I don't want to belittle actual medical conditions or diminish them, but it does feel like it's a common thing about like when the voices start saying things that you can't know, that's the problem, right? Yeah. Like, and this feels like a clear demarcation that this isn't just Rand, but this is another presence within his mind or a total fabrication of his madness.
And I think that the thing that really worried me is Rand is hyper aware of Lews Therin in this moment. He is very clearly like, what is me? What is him? I need to hold on to myself. And then he just goes into this long diatribe about the crimes of the Forsaken, which are all details he could not possibly know as Rand al'Thor. And so the idea that he is kind of both aware of Lews Therin's voice and no longer aware of Lews Therin's memories bleeding into his own kind of raises that specter as you're describing. We're kind of used to this story being someone who is aware of kind of what's happening to themselves and kind of watching it, but the person who doesn't quite know when they're slipping, I think, is much more interesting. And it's the thing we see a few times in this chapter. The most prominent moment is break them all, being repeated out loud. How are you feeling? We already talked about this a little bit, but this is the chapter that I think anyone on the outside would look at Rand and go like, oh, this is a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, the silly thing to say is just that when this is where the book starts, it makes me think this is going to be a key conflict. And, I don't know about putting this behind us forever, but it makes me think that this is going to become much more the prominent part of Rand's story, where it's been on the back burner kind of cooking. It's certainly very present, especially in the last book, but it makes me think that to get it this prominent this early in this book, I think it's going to come to a head. It's going to boil, to continue the right metaphor. It's going to boil by the end of the book.
Well, if we're talking about things that are laid out early in the book, Rand kind of has a thesis statement for his plan going forward. Why not just kill all the Forsaken? Taim kind of asks him, what are your plans? And his response is, they're terrible people. There's nothing to do but kill them all. He's halfway there, but there's also a part of me that wonders, in a series that has been so far defined by like Rand the good leader versus Rand the bad guy, kill 'em all is both a good Metallica title and a bad thesis for a government.
Oh, he's halfway there? Oh. Living on a Prayer. That's a reference to a song you don't know. I think we talked last week about how they felt like the mini bosses, and this is like, let's clean up the mini bosses, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think you get to there in a video game a lot of times where they're like, there's 4 lieutenants in these 4 territories. Pick one to go to now. And then after you get all of those, the big stuff is really coming. So yeah, I agree. It seems like it might take more than a book, but I'm down for some Forsaken hunting.
I want your then just kind of general opinion on Taim the character, right? You already mentioned the interesting moment where he demands a partnership and then immediately backs down. There's a couple of really kind of telling moments where it's clear Taim disagrees with Rand and just kind of like gives a smirk or like a cheesy something and then moves on. What is your take on this guy? Do you see him as being open and direct? Do you see him as super obfuscating? Like, where are you at with him 15 pages in?
So, being a red-blooded man of just over 40 years old, I will say American men of my generation had to choose 2 paths in this life. Are you a Luke Skywalker or are you a Han Solo? And I'm a Luke Skywalker, which means in fiction I like to pretend to be a Han Solo. And I think the Han Solos in real life wish they could be Luke Skywalkers. This is my thesis of modern masculinity's crisis. 10-part spin-off podcast coming soon.
Some of us are Luke Skywalkers who want to be Jawas, but continue.
I will say this to me feels like a good way to summarize these 2 dudes at this moment is that Rand is a Luke Skywalker. He's destined for great things. He's kind of going to be a little more lawful good. And Taim strikes me as a pure Han Solo. He's got the swagger. He's got the charisma. He's a little more the chaotic good. And I think, and I'm not willing to bet or put any money on him staying good at the moment, but seems like he's on the side of good at the moment.
Totally.
So I think that to me is a set of characters that, even the Star Wars analogy breaks down because they are buddies and they don't really butt heads a lot. But it strikes me that this parrot's going to come to heads butting quite often. And I'm really excited for it. Like, as I said, that plot line for me, as the last 20 episodes probably in book 5 showed, could use a little breath of fresh air. And this feels like potentially a really good one.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. A couple of just really quick notes then that I have in kind of the middle section of this chapter. Rand trying to piece together how long is he going to stay sane based on the information he's getting about Taim and his past people he's trained, I thought was really kind of fascinating and a really great character moment for Rand. You can kind of see the wheels turning there in a way that sometimes he's a little bit opaque as a character. And the other thing that I kind of liked within this is there's this really interesting moment where Bashere almost like gives him the child's answer after Rand is talking about breaking the seals of the Dark One's prison, right? Bashere just kind of like calmly walks up to him and is like, hey, buddy, why don't we put this off until later and you can go have an apple juice, right? Like that moment, I don't know why, it felt like Bashere really nailed managing Rand, and Rand kind of needed to be managed at that moment in a way that I don't think we've really seen him need, maybe because Moraine has always been there to fill in the gaps when necessary.
With no intended disrespect to any of my current or former students, you encounter students on campuses in those kind of panic spirals sometimes. Yeah. And that's exactly what that felt like is, and half the time it's not a student I am teaching or know, but I see a student kind of in crisis in some ways. And it's usually like, oh, I got to get to my exam and I didn't study and my scholarship. And you just got to be like, whoa, hey, let's just not worry about that bigger picture. Let's just get you to the room you need to go to. And let's just try our best, and whatever the consequences are, we'll figure out after. And so it did feel like, as you just said, like the correct way to engage him in that. And, it is a funny thing with prophecy where it's like, that's going to happen, right? If everything's right, then it's just going to happen. And so let's not rush our way there. Let's just make sure we're ready for it when it comes.
Yeah, and I think that Bashire's ability to kind of give that like really calm, gentle reassurance and then immediately be handed a seal of the Dark One's prison and just be like, yep, I'm going to die before I let this thing break. That's a fun character, right? I'm excited to see Bashere going forward. The last note I have is Rand is taking Taim to the farm, and the two things that he is interested in for Taim to do at the farm are test whether people can channel and train people to channel. Obviously, we'll get more details about this whenever the characters arrive at the farm, possibly exactly 1 week from now on this same podcast. What are your thoughts on what Rand has planned? And is there anything either surprising or kind of lining up with what you had expected from what you're getting the hints from Rand thus far?
Well, my first reaction was the old cliches about, oh, your puppy went to live at a farm upstate, right? Like, I'm gonna take him to the farm. So and then just to clarify, is it the farm it's not the farm they got the seal at? That's a different farm.
Correct. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
a different farm.
That confused me. But
I really loved the moment where Taim is like, "What farm? What are you talking about? Tell me what the farm is." Like, that moment worked for me.
And so I then think of farm like, military academies or something get that nickname.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like where the crop of new recruits is or something like that, and where we grow the armies and the recruits. So I'm excited. I assume Taim will be a central part of Rand's promise to try to train more men to channel. We also got a very clear reminder at one moment in, I think, the first one of these chapters, one of them about the powerful Terangrial in his pocket, right? To just remind Angriel, sorry,
Yep.
to remind us that this is this is not a level playing field, and Rand wants to kind of bring equality, but is going to make sure he's ahead of that crowd. So
Yeah.
it all sounds good to me. These served exactly the purpose two opening chapters should. I'm like, all right, let's get back into it. Let's see where we develop this. So I'm excited.
One last just itty-bitty detail. Bashere and Rand have something cooked up that apparently involves Rand inspecting the troops as an important part of the plan. And that's a weird detail that I need to make sure is in our brains, as he probably inspects the troop in a week or two, and we need to know that that is, for some reason, important. As we move forward, though, I do have to say we've got a couple of pretty good chapters coming up next week, and then a bunch of single chapter weeks all in a row. We're going to have a little bit of a slow start in terms of chapters per week coming up soon. Next week, however, we have Chapter 3, A Woman's Eyes, and Chapter 4, A Sense of Humor. And Greg, we have a bunch of plot lines that we haven't checked in with at all, but we've also got some exciting things clearly coming up for Rand. What are you hoping for in these next couple chapters? And is there anything that you have on your wish list for this book, right? What would be the dream to see at the beginning of one of the chapters going forward?
I want more Perrin and Fail, just because we've been absent from them so long. It would be mind-blowing to see, like, Moraine at the start of one of those. But I would say Perrin and Fail and the Rebel camp are where I'm most interested in learning more. And again, we have our weird structure, but if this were me, I would be zipping through till I could find one of those chapters, I think, if I was reading this at my own pace. But I am not reading this at my own pace, and I remain glad to do it at our pace. So thank you so much to everybody for listening for another week. We hope you're as excited as we are to be cracking open yet another book. As we alluded to, it's also imminently going to be the third season of the television show, and those episodes are coming soon. I know we're just slightly ahead of you all at this time, but I will say that in my other podcasting duties, I've been doing nothing but Oscar movies all the time. And so if you're interested in hearing some coverage of many of the Oscar nominees, most recently I'm Still Here and Flow, and then coverage of the ceremony by the time you hear this. Yeah. That's over on the Long Take Review, which you can find wherever you're listening to this. And if that's not enough to tide you over, I don't know, find some other things to do with your time. It's not all up to me, but I'll see you next time through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, Amazon, or our wives. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, find us on Instagram or Threads by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being a part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, leave us a review wherever you are listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time on Through the Glass Columns.